Good morning. We will call the special meeting of the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority for Wednesday, September 27th to order. The time is 9:47. I want to welcome our board members and guests to the meeting. After, from a public comment perspective, after I open an item for public comment, those joining us by Zoom webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button, which is located on the middle bottom portion of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. SPRTA staff will call out individuals one by one who have indicated they wish to speak. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during this meeting, please email your comments to Solvi at sabol@pctpa.net. And thank you very much. And if you would, please rise for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sylvie, could we get a roll call, please?
Broadway.
Here.
Howdeshelt.
Here.
Joyner. Here. Jones.
Here. Excellent. Next item on our agenda is item C, approval of the action minutes from our August 23rd, 2023 meeting. Are there any changes that are noted or need to be noted relative to the action items? Anything from staff? There being none, could I get a motion to accept the meeting minutes? To approve. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? There being none, all in, or actually, Sylvia, you want to just do that to a roll call? Are we good to move
We don't
forward?
have to do roll call because
Okay.
we're all here.
Perfect. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed or abstentions? There being none, passes unanimously. Next item is item D, our agenda review. Are there any changes to the agenda today?
No, Chair, there are no changes to the agenda, but I do want to point out one thing. Under item G, it says it's for information. We will be asking for action as part of item G.
Okay, so noted. Thank you very much. Anything from?
Chair, so do I want to, there's an error in the staff report
Okay.
in item G, an east versus west distinction. So do I bring that up now or later?
I was going to mention that in the presentation.
Perfect.
All right.
So I do have a question. This is listed as an information item. There may be some folks who didn't come because they didn't realize action was going to be taken. Is that it?
It is not an issue. We spoke with Deanne with General Counsel and we are okay.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
I see Deanne brought her camera on. Deanne, would you like to speak? She's
Yeah. And only if it's necessary. I didn't catch all of the discussion, but related to the agenda item G, the description on the agenda asks for approval and direction from the board, and you're not making a final approval. So the uncertainty and confusion on the agenda is something that is not a Brown Act violation if the board does provide direction to staff regarding the preparation of the final report. So if I addressed the question, I missed some of the dialogue.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Deanne.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other comments regarding today's agenda? Nope. Being none, we'll move to item E, which is AB 2449. Matt?
No action necessary. We have a quorum in person.
Wonderful. Thank you. Our next item is item F. This is public comment. It's an opportunity for members of the public to comment on items not on our agenda today. Members who wish to speak will be limited to 3 minutes. Is there anyone in chambers that wishes to comment on an item not on our agenda today? There being none, do we have anyone online? No. All right. We will therefore move to item G. Item G is an action item. Regional Transportation and Air Quality Mitigation Fee Nexus Study, Assumptions and Fee Deferral Program. I believe Rep Carter will be presenting that today.
Morning, Chair and board members. Before I get started, I did want to introduce Don Hubbard. He is on the staff at GHG. He is the consultant that we hired to prepare the Nexus study because of his expertise in this field. So he's available if we have any kind of technical questions related to the Nexus study and the work that's been done. In terms of background, so we're talking about the Tier 1 fee that was originally adopted in 2002. It's been updated in 2006, 7, 9, and then last in 2014, about 9 years ago. So it's it's been a little while. It's due for an update. As I mentioned, we hired Don and his staff to prepare a Nexus study. At next month's meeting, our plan is to come and have you adopt that. So we're kind of going into more kind of technical details and the work that was done in the background of that at that time. But to just very briefly, we worked with the agencies at that Nexus study, updated the land use assumptions, the roadway network, the projects and their costs, and produced a new set of fees. And we made that available in July. The fees changed quite a bit. We have fees going down as much as $460 in Roseville East, and that's the correction that Mayor Howdeschelt made reference to. The staff report happens to mention Roseville West, and that's Roseville East. The fees went up as much as $3,095 for the city of Lincoln. So it is a sizable change and sizable increase where those fees went up. We made that study available to the stakeholders, and we received a variety of comments. The comments are included as a couple of memos and attachments. What we're coming to you today is seeking board concurrence relating to a couple of those comments and direction. So shown on the slide, these are the three items that we're really seeking board concurrence and direction on, and I'll go into detail on each of these in the next few slides. So we met with the BIA, and their top concern really was the cost and the changes with the 8065 interchange. And for a good reason. There's substantial changes with this project, and it's really the thing that is driving most of the change within the fee program. So in terms of background, decade plus ago, that project was estimated at about $120 million. It was added into the Tier 1 fee in 2014 with the SPRTA share of the cost of about $5 million. And that kind of low $5 million amount assumed a significant amount of outside funding coming from grants, the transportation funding measure, kind of other sources. And kind of when we go to today, what's really changed is in that interim period, there's been a lot of study and analysis done on that interchange. We have a Caltrans approved design for that. The scope became much larger. It has HOV direct connectors. It has a kind of the collector distributor facility. I think most of you are aware of, kind of related to Taylor and Eureka. So the project became much larger. Obviously, with a larger project, the costs are higher. We've also had a decade's worth of inflation. And then what we've put into the Nexus is what I sort of call the full developer cost share. Kind of the graphic over on the right kind of shows how the math works, but kind of real briefly, when we're looking at a facility that's over capacity, you have a share that's new growth and a share that's existing over capacity. What the kind of the SPRTA share is, the SPRTA share of growth over everything that's over capacity. The little graphic's kind of the SPRTA share growth, kind of shown as the Y. The X is everything that's over capacity. And sort of mathematically, that comes out to about $207 million of the total project cost. So it's not an insignificant, amount. So when we met with the BIA, we had a lot of discussions over this. I think fundamentally sort of came to a couple of questions. That's basically, are all the phases of that work likely within the time horizon of the SPRTA fee? That fee is roughly a 20-year lookout. And, sort of discussing this internally and what we really think, we do think that comment is appropriate, and that the appropriate response is to take that third phase of the project, sort of move it out of the 20-year horizon. So it's about $100 million cost. That phase wouldn't go away. It wouldn't be funded. It's just not funded in the current SPRTA fee. Over time, as it gets updated, that would be added back in, along with additional development that's assumed to occur in the future. So there's a legitimate funding mechanism for that. The fee, there's a law in place now. Those fees have to be updated not longer than every 8 years. So at least every 8 years, that would be reevaluated. And then the other question was the assumptions on the amount of outside funding. So interchange projects like this, are often funded with state and federal funds. 80, as sort of we discussed in the last meeting, right? That's an interstate corridor. It's a huge freight corridor. There is kind of a federal responsibility to fund that. And we had a lot of discussion about that and our opportunities to go get grants. And one of the things that came out of those discussions was a commitment from the BIA to work with us and pursue both state and federal grants, and to use not only the resources available to us, but the resources that come out of the BIA and kind of their national kind of parent organization to go after and seek those funds. So what the conclusion of that is that we think it's appropriate to increase that assumptions for outside funding by about 42 million. So with the combination of those, what you see here is the fees change, the Roseville West cost, it drops even further, it drops down about 561. And then the largest increase becomes about 2,000. Correct. I've done it twice now. Thank you, Bruce. Yeah. So this table sort of shows the changes of splitting that interchange project into 2 phases. And then this table is a combination of tables 1 and 2 that are in the staff report. Shows how these assumptions make changes between the July fee and the proposed, I'm calling this September proposal. See the changes over on the right. So it is a substantial change. I mean, with this, there's still a marked increase in the fee for the districts that go out. So it's still a kind of sizable increase, but not as much. So the next issue is regarding residential tiers. The SPRTA fee currently has what I'll call a flat fee for residential. If you're building a 1,500 square foot home next to a 3,000 square foot home, currently they pay the same fee. There's no adjustment based on size. There was state legislation a couple years ago that as a policy, they're looking for lower fees for smaller units. You can no longer do kind of a flat fee across the board. So working with the TAC and the agency members on how to approach this, we came up with essentially 3 size tiers that I'll show in the next slide. The graph over on the right shows how the number of trips generated changes with floor area. And working with our consultant staff, we came up with 3 tiers. It's kind of what's shown as the red lines on that graph on the top part, and kind of group those into sizes. So this shows the proposal for the 3 tiers, split with less than 1,500, from 1,500 to 25 and greater than 25. And then the percentages are how the fees change. So the middle one is kind of your average, gets 100% of the fee. The less than 1,500 would pay 83% of that fee, whatever that fee was in a particular district. And the larger size would be at 111. The BIA has strongly advocated for a switch to go to 4 tiers. And so the little chart on the bottom is what we have proposed with them. The 2 tiers at the bottom stay the same. The top tier gets split. And so the fees change a little bit. Working with our agency staff and the TAC, the tax recommendation is the 3 tiers. They want to stick with the 3. It's reduced complexity, reduced kind of administrative burden. They pointed out there's not a significant change in terms of the cost. It's plus or minus 3%. I believe Jeff Short's probably going to speak to this later. They did really like the 4 tier. I think it more accurately differentiates the cost for the sizes. The last item is regarding a fee deferral. We did receive a proposal from some members of the development community to essentially expand the existing deferral program that exists in the Tier 2 program into Tier 1. To kind of summarize their proposal, they looked at our cash flow. They assumed that there would be additional revenue coming in, which would allow a deferral and an equivalent cash flow to what we have assumed currently. Proposal is to defer up to 50% of the fee, capped at $1,500. This would apply just to residential units, apply for a 15-year period. The repayment, they had proposed two options. One is a repayment at 30 years, which is how the Tier 2 program is set up. The other was to start at 15 years using the PAYGO revenue. That's kind of an incremental difference between the revenue that comes in and the bond payment. So there's a little extra money that tends to come in above what the bond payment requirements are. So that would be used to make those payments. In reviewing that proposal, both internally and with the TAC, identified a number of kind of concerns with this. Our expenditure plan is based on when revenue comes in, not when the projects are needed. So any form of deferral would be a delay in delivering those projects. Most of the projects have an existing need already. There's concern with the administrative burden of tracking and accounting for this. Repayments using PAYGO would result in an earlier payment, but also an additional increase in accounting because it doesn't make a single payment. It's a series of payments over multiple years that have to be tracked and accounted for. The other comment was with the changes to the 8065 interchange, the fees coming down, and it does sort of lessen the burdens associated with that, kind of lessening the impact and the need for a deferral. And the kind of unanimous recommendation out of the TAC was to not move forward with the deferral program. So the action requested today is to approve the staff recommendations regarding the changes, the reductions in cost and funding assumptions for the 8065 interchange, to maintain the 3 residential tiers, also kind of to deny the proposal for the fee deferral program. And next steps with this, based on direction we get from the board today, we'll revise the Nexus study, revise the draft CIP I brought at the last meeting for consistency with the Nexus, and then the plan is to bring that back in October for adoption of the Nexus and the fee and the CIP. And then with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board has.
Any questions from the board?
Sorry, we're so glad. We're glad I'm not reaching over there. I thought you wanted my list of questions.
Well, no. I think I'm going to start with the fee deferral. I'm not confident that I fully understand how that works. Literally that. So I'm a home buyer. There's a fee deferral. Is that going to affect me directly, and how?
Yes, the way the fee deferral would work is when the builder pulls a permit, they would pay a portion of the fee and they wouldn't pay the full fee. The balance that wasn't paid would end up as basically into a CFD, and the homeowner would pay that as part of their, it's not really the tax roll, but when they pay their annual taxes, it's included.
It'll be shown as a CFD there.
CFD in the
along
tax
way.
bill, yes. And
that's fully disclosed in the document.
fully disclosed in the documents, and then they would, depending on how it worked, they'd either make additional payments after year 30 instead of having it end at year 30. A new bond would be issued to pay for the amount of the fee that had not been paid, inflated over time. The PAYGO option would work essentially the same. They at the end of 30 years, they'd still have payments to make.
So conceivably, this could be renewed how many times?
The way
At the end of 30 years,
at the end of 30 years, it would be renewed again.
right. But let's assume another 30 years passes. Can it be renewed again? Could this be ongoing?
No, it would not be, because it'd be paid one of two ways. They'd either issue a bond, another bond at 30 years that would run another 30 years, or there's some other structures they could continue to make payments, but it would run for a number of years until the payments. have
But this
been paid.
could conceivably run 60 years
Correct.
on a homeowner.
It could run 60 years.
Okay.
But you should ask the question, what happens if you sell your house to me? Who gets the deferral?
It goes with the house.
It runs with the house.
Doesn't.
I guess I'm going to say it this way. I've dug through this multiple times. I have some concerns. I have a lot of questions that aren't going to get resolved here today. And I'm trying to get to, you're just asking for those three things today.
Correct.
I have some challenges with some of the assumptions. So I'm going to ask this, because this will be coming back in October. I'm going to ask that we get a meeting on the books where I can sit down with you, with my staff in a room and work through all of my concerns. I think some of the assumptions with respect to Lincoln and what will be built over the next 20 years are probably wrong. I think we've got some in your favor, frankly. I think we've got about 1 million square feet more commercial planned in Village 5 than you're taking a look at. And I also think that as Village 7 and Village 5 come on, you're going to see a lot more high density residential than the assumption of single family homes. And so I think there's some adjustments to be made in there. My instinct was to ask that this be delayed, to buy me a month to do that. If you'll promise me that we're going to sit down in the next couple of weeks and we're going to have an in-depth conversation about this.
Yeah.
And that if we need to make adjustments before October, we can do that. Then I won't ask for that delay, but I've got some serious concerns. And
We'll
as
sit
you can
down
see,
today. We'll sit down as soon as you're ready.
please,
We're happy to.
please, and you can take a look at those Lincoln numbers and see that is rattling for us. And we've got to take a hard look at that. Okay.
Thank you, Paul.
Mr. Chairman, I have a number of questions, and some are just data points. So the third phase is the flyover HOV lane.
Yes. The HOV connectors.
Okay, so I'm not a traffic engineer, but boy, that just feels to me, I love when I go to the Bay Area traveling with more than just myself, and I can use that HOV lane to get onto the bridge while everybody's sitting backed up all the way to Albany. Boy, it just seems like delaying that is really congestion inducing.
So two things, at the PCTPA board, well, you were all there. That board approved a contract to do some construction sequencing at the interchange. So we'll take a good look at that and see. I think fundamentally with this, we are really moving costs. Whether the phases change is possible, but we have had discussions with them, and it is quite difficult. Caltrans had wanted us to do this as the first phase, and it's very difficult to do that as a first phase because the loop ramp has to move and that sort of thing to be able to fit those HOV lanes in. And the freeway basically has to be sort of pushed to the outside to make room. And so there are challenges to doing that, but we will be taking a look at all of that with that phasing study.
And I think the next three questions are nexus study related. I didn't see accessory dwelling units factored into.
It's there.
Huh?
They're there.
Where are they?
On the tables.
So they're looking at dwelling units, and they have factors for those. I think I'm going to defer to Dawn actually on the accessory dwelling units. I know we
I saw
don't.
single family, I saw multifamily. I didn't
My
see.
memory is there's 0 fee to be paid by them. They're on the chart.
I didn't see them on table 5. We're gonna find. Okay.
Here, they are now a separate category. The fee is calculated a different way. If they're below 750 square feet, they don't pay any fee. If they're above 750 square feet, the fee is based on the size of the ADU compared to the size of the primary dwelling unit. So if the ADU is half the size of the primary unit, you figure out what the primary unit would pay if it was new, and then the ADU pays half of that. So that's
So it's
SB
1.5
13.
times?
No, half it's the floor area, it's the ratio of the floor area of the ADU compared to the floor area of the primary unit. So if you have an ADU that's 1,000 square feet, so it's over 750, it's not free, and it's associated with a primary unit that is 2,000 square feet, the ADU is half the size of the primary unit. It pays half the fee that the primary unit would pay.
Right, so that lot, what I was saying was that lot pays 1.5 times.
Ye-
Right, because you have.
Well, the assumption is that the ADU is being built on a place that already has the primary.
But it's not,
The primary isn't charged, but you have to calculate it as if, that's the state legislature. You calculate it as
Okay.
if you have a lot with a 2,000 square foot unit.
pardon me, let me get my ignorance out.
Yeah.
The primary is generating traffic. The
That's-
ADU is generating traffic.
That's correct. If they were
So
built,
that's 1.5 times the traffic generation and they're charging, it, right?
that is true, if they were built at the same time. But ordinarily, you have a lot, it's got an existing unit. So you're basing the cost of the ADU on that existing unit.
Gotcha.
That's where it comes in.
And the state's gonna allow 2 ADUs, so
And then I'll find
you could
where.
have double.
Exactly.
So
Huh?
remain, because I think this is a question for you. So I didn't understand how level of service is calculated into this. Is it calculated in?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So it has always been best practice when you're defining what a deficiency is to base it on level of service. And your program has always done best practice. Okay, but as of last year, it's now a statutory requirement. You have to say what the level of service is. You have to show your work and how that calculation is made. So as you can see in that slide, that if you could go back to that slide a moment. That one. So you've got some capacity for the road, and that's based on the target level of service.
Right.
So you're defining a deficiency as traffic above that level of service. So if your level of service is D and you've got now traffic that pushes it to E or F, that's how you know you have a deficiency. And the reason that the state requires you to do this is so that the project list isn't just a wish list of what people think are worthy projects. You have to show there really is a deficiency. And to support the calculation as to how much of that deficiency is attributable to new development.
Okay, stay there. So at the September 12th Board of Supervisors meeting, there was a public comment from a resident in Granite Bay about Douglas Boulevard and how congested it is.
Mhm.
So how is that factored into this? And doesn't that make an argument that the Granite Bay fee shouldn't be, the Granite Bay district fee should not be going down?
Well, the question is whether or not Douglas Boulevard's on the project list.
So I'll answer that because this is a regional fee, it's not looking at every roadway. And so from we work with the TAC to look at the roadways that should be covered by the regional fee. And that's the list of the roadways, and Douglas was not
Gotcha.
included.
But when you go back to LOS, you're looking at the city's LOSs, right? Like, I think, as I look here, Rockland is, if you're within a mile of a freeway, and the county has its own LOS, so why isn't the county's LOS factored into the fact that,
That
it's not a roadway, but the LOS is factored into the nexus stuff?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but if I do, I think I'd explain it this way. We have a list of a list of projects to be covered by this fee, which is not necessarily all the roadways that could be covered.
Okay.
It's a list that was considered, from the tax standpoint, the roads that should be covered by the regional fee. For each of those roads, we do a LOS analysis, and that LOS is based on the LOS of the jurisdiction the road is within. So it does actually change depending on the roadway. But there was simply I think a decision made from a TAC perspective to not include Douglas.
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna go on for a while, so bear with me. So I'm coming from Granite Bay and I go, yeah, I do not want to go through the Roseville section of Douglas Boulevard. I'm gonna make a right, I'm gonna go up Sierra College Boulevard, and I'm gonna connect to Rockland Road. And I think a couple of those roadways are in the study. So you see how the connection I'm trying to make is that I don't think any of these district fees should probably go down. And I think then that allows some movement on some other district fees, but you're the traffic engineer, you're the numbers guy. I just want to say that, that's the logic, right? I mean, I think human behavior is, you got Eureka Road paralleling Douglas Boulevard, and I take Eureka Road to get to Auburn Folsom Road, because I don't want to be on.
Take the quickest route.
Right. How's through traffic calculated in here?
Which won't be quick for long.
How's through traffic calculated here?
We use the regional traffic model, and it's calculated two different ways. Number one, it already is existing through traffic is in the existing traffic counts. It's in the existing condition. It would be in the gray area on this. And then future through traffic. So there will be some growth, say north of 65, that will be contributing some traffic that comes through the 65-80 interchange.
Right.
That is separated out. So when we look at the traffic model, we do what's called the select zone analysis. So we just look at the trips that are generated in each of the SPRTA zones and charge them their contribution to the future traffic. They are not responsible for somebody else's development. They are not responsible for existing traffic.
So Yuba County, Sutter County's traffic is part of that regional model?
Yes, and it does come, and it does feed through I-80 and other.
But we don't but they're not charged.
You can only charge things in your own jurisdiction because they're the ones that come to your counter. You can't really charge fees on somebody in a different district unless they voluntarily came to your counter and offered.
So didn't I see that Rockland actually does attempt to collect the impacts from another jurisdiction on their roadways? The level of service, I thought I saw that wording.
I don't believe so, no.
Yeah.
No, I would love to.
Yeah, I was wondering how you did it, but
There are parts of the state where there are reciprocal agreements, where each of the local cities has their own fee program, but they have an agreement with the adjacent fee program that says if development on your side of the line affects us, you will pay in, and if development on our side of the line affects you, we'll pay. So you can make such an arrangement, but that doesn't exist at the moment.
Maybe it's through gas tax or something like that. Because we could.
Yeah, if I could through the chair, I mean, so these are good questions, and they do get to some of the limitations of anything that we do, right? The only way to exactly perfectly assign a cost relative to one's usage would be to price every car on every road at every time of day based on which direction it was traveling, the capacity of the road, its level of service. And so there is a level of free ridership. There is going to be external traffic outside of our fee jurisdiction that's going to come down, and we're not going to exactly be able to capture for that. Or there are going to potentially, to an earlier question with the example of Douglas, be roads that aren't part of the SPRTA CIP list. And so, and there's questions about what that list should be into the future and things like that. But outside of doing that, where you are going to price every road, every vehicle all of the time, there is going to be some level of free ridership. That's just the nature of the beast. But what the Nexus study does through the 9 distinct geographic locations and the projects and everything that Don's been talking about is it does a very, very, very good job attributing those costs out. But is it perfect? No.
I think I'm done with my Nexus questions. So the relationship between what we're about to do and our conversations with SACOG over programming and funding and air quality and traffic mitigation. Can you just talk a little bit about the importance of what is before us and the greater aspects of air quality and SACOG's role?
Yeah, I can do my best. I'll start. I mean, essentially what this is one stream of revenue that we rely on and program projects based on, just as we do, make certain assumptions about our funding measure. And then, the category I'll call other people's money, federal grants, federal CDSs, state ones as well. And so this is a revenue stream that we then count on when we are prioritizing all of the projects in our RTP that gets rolled up into the MTP. And so to the extent that this funding, is necessary for the projects that are on the list that SACOG is going to then model for us for air quality, that's a start of an answer. Is there a second half of that, Bruce, you want me to try to tackle?
Yeah, just, as we look at a new future, where all 6 of the regions are competing for funding, does this strengthen our position? Or does this have an impact on our ability to go to our colleagues at SACOG and say, hey, we're doing our fair share, but we have gap funding and you need to fund this roadway?
Yeah. I mean, it absolutely does. It's something they're used to seeing. It's something that we've been doing for a number of years now. So yeah, if we weren't to do this, anymore into the future or do it to a different level, it would put us at a competitive disadvantage within the SACOG region. Yeah.
And then with respect to fee deferral, does that create inequities? I buy my house today.
Yeah.
And then a fee deferral occurs. Somebody moves in 3 months from now. I paid more for this, right? I guess it probably happens in the cost of lumber too, but I paid the fee with somebody who's down, 3 months, 6 months from now, buys the same house, doesn't pay it because there's a fee deferral. Is there logic in that?
There is. I mean, there's a lot of versions. There's horizontal inequity, there's vertical inequity, there's temporal, geographic, right? You like that?
Temporal inequity.
Yeah. And so there's generational inequity. There's lots of people who will tell you, well, heck, we already built the interstate. Why do I have to pay for it again? And the truth is you didn't. Your grandfather and grandmother did. They paid for it. It hasn't been, once you pay off your house, you still got to redo the roof and the HVAC and everything else. There's just, so yes, there is an equity. There's plenty of equity arguments to be made, but I would prefer to point back to something that Rick has already stated and highlight that again, is that the fact of the matter is, the project list that we have right now, I mean, we are already in the rears in what we need, and any sort of deferral or delay is just going to, at the end of the day, it's going to delay our ability to develop and build these projects. And it's just going to result in more congestion for all of the residents of the district. So to me, that would be the biggest impact of a deferral, is basically deferring it is just, it's just kicking the can down the road, quite frankly.
And then it also impacts our ability to get federal dollars, what little there are of federal dollars.
Yes, without local sources of revenue, whether it be this or a future measure, our ability to obtain matching funds. And yes, we are at an extreme competitive disadvantage. We are working against 25 other counties in the state of California that have local funding. And if we do not have local funding, we will not be able to bring more of our own money to, quite frankly, that we've already paid to DC and Sacramento back to Placer County. So it really will limit our ability to go get our money back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank my colleagues for indulging my questions.
Thank you. Another.
I may jump back in since Bruce kind of started us down this path. So I think a phrase in the staff report that troubles me is although traffic modeling and growth assumptions affect all fees, the largest factor in the increase in fees is the cost of the I-80 State Route 65 interchange. What this currently feels like to me is, holy crap, the cost went way up. How many projects do we have left that we can put that onto? And there's been a substantial amount of growth that's happened between the time that SPARTA was originally created to now. And for Lincoln, this is feeling a bit like you're one of the few areas left that's going to grow. You're going to have to take a whole bunch of responsibility for this. And as I look through the assignments of percentage of cost, Lincoln's paying for stretches of Interstate 80 between Douglas and Riverside.
But
That's so the 8065 interchange is 10 miles away from the city of Lincoln. It's closer to Citrus Heights and Antelope than it is to Lincoln, and yet we are taking a very large portion of that burden on. That's a hard nexus for me to make as we move forward. And I get why you might be doing that right now. But as we move forward, what we're trying to do with this annexation of Village 5 and other areas is bring very large commercial and retail into our community so that we're not traveling nearly as much, and build job centers in our community so we're not traveling nearly as much, so that the growth assumptions that's going to increase the number of trips heading down 65, I think are probably an error. If we're able to pull this off, we're going to reduce the number of vehicle trips, in point of fact. And so that heavy burden falling on Lincoln concerns me a lot. And I'm just not sure we can make. That's the conversation we're going to have is I need to actually see the nexus, and not simply how much growth do we have left and how can we divide this cost up among what's left. And I'll give you an example. For me right now, the way costs are being attributed to industrial and commercial properties doesn't quite work. And this is not picking on Roseville, but I'm going to pick on Roseville. They're going to add about 1 million square feet of additional retail next to the fountains. That's an attractor. That is pulling traffic towards it, correct? And yet the fee is being calculated on square footage of what's built and not the the generation of vehicle trips. Another example of that is the new Sac State campus that's being proposed. The new president of Sac State has said that he wants all students to live on campus for 2 years. I haven't seen you build in that residential component and the attractor component of a Sac State campus or a regional university to a level that I think is fair, equitable.
Yeah, and I think what you're getting into is certain technical issues around the methodology of the Nexus study,
Yeah.
which obviously, Rick and Don would be the best to answer. And we can go through all of that with you. Some of that might be able to be resolved. Some of that might be able to be explained based on, the methodology and how it, how you have to carry out the Nexus work. Rick, I don't know if you want to sort of start to try to answer a couple of those as far as residential versus commercial.
I don't know that this is the best venue to dive into the technical details we've, discussed.
That's why I was
Yeah.
hesitating to do it. But
And very happy to meet with you. And I think we can go over all of that. And if we, if there's inaccurate assumptions or things that are incorrect, then we can make those changes. Again, we'd be happy to meet with you and your staff and go over that in detail.
it's going to be rough for me to turn to my future residents and say, you're paying for something 12 miles away.
Understand.
When Roseville and Rockland are right there, and the amount that they're going to be paying is significantly less.
Understand. I think a meeting would be very, very helpful.
All right, Supervisor Jones, if could you also in this conversation, it doesn't have to be answered now, but when you're having the conversation with Lincoln, could you factor in, my understanding is that there was a decision made to direct funding to the Lincoln bypass, that then projects were kicked further down the list because there's just not enough funding there. So in the math that you do, I would like the Lincoln bypass and what is it, $140 million to be calculated into the calculus that, because that meant that, for instance, I believe Rockland had to wait a little bit longer for a project they thought was of importance. And so priority list movement. So you don't have to answer it now. And thank you, Supervisor Jones, for letting me jump in on that one.
No problem, no problem. I was hoping you could, can you define Roseville East and in relation to Granite Bay?
Yeah, the map was hard
So
to
it
read.
just starts where Granite Bay ends and it goes to where? Does it go west of 80 or?
There's a map.
It'd be helpful if I turned on my mic. There is a map about 6 pages into the nexus that's part of the attachment.
Okay, I'll find it.
Yeah, so unfortunately, the map doesn't have streets labeled on it. Roseville East and West are within the limits of the city of Roseville. That Granite Bay district picks up the unincorporated county that is east of Roseville.
There it is. There it is. Okay, good. Yeah, Sierra Colors.
Having just relocated inside of this area. Yeah, that's Sierra College Boulevard, I believe, is the north-south dividing line between Roseville East and Granite Bay. Is that the question?
Right, right. And I know, Bruce, you were talking about Douglas Boulevard and the impact. The biggest problem with Douglas Boulevard and Eureka is the traffic traveling between, the traffic generated on that street is traffic coming and going from Folsom to Roseville. It's commuter traffic on there at this point. So you want to talk about, charging adjoining districts, it would be like Folsom. It should be footing the bill. And then Roseville, it's a thoroughfare there. We generate somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50,000 cars on Douglas Boulevard. And we only have, let's see, recently only 1, 2, 3, 4 new housing developments, and they're not very large. So there's not very much traffic impact fees that we even have to take care of the things that we need to do locally. So, and with regard to our lowering our fees, or not our fees being lower, is that because you don't think that we impact the 85?
Yeah, the main driver with those fees dropping is a couple of things. Between the two studies, there were some changes in the amount of development that will be occurring in the future, because Granite Bay is basically a limited amount of development. So some of that has occurred in the intervening 9 years. The other thing that's a large driver within the fee program, there is basically a group of fee credits that basically come from the initial adoption of the program in 2002. The various agencies had either funding they had collected in other fee programs or funding they had put into certain projects that were in the fee program. So to kind of balance things out, they were allotted credits against those districts. And so in the last 21 years, those credits have been tracked. Somebody basically, they pull a permit, they pay a reduced fee. There's an amount that is essentially deducted from that amount of fee credit. But Granite Bay has a large fee credit. And so just mathematically, you apply their real cost impact, and then you account for the fee credit that the county identified way back in the day, they get a large credit and it ends up as a reduction in the overall fee program
Mhm.
comparatively.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and all those developments that have been going on in my district were approved a long time ago. We could use higher traffic impact fees, but it's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Anything else?
No, not for me.
Just carrying that a step further to understanding the credits, is that applicable as well to West Roseville and the reduction in fees to West Roseville from a credit perspective? Because here's the struggle in relationship to what the staff report says and what we see in the tables and the data we've been given relative to how these are calculated. It's very difficult to say, I've seen a 600% increase in planned product costs, and yet I have areas that are seeing reductions when I know that they are still impacting the areas where these projects are going to occur. And so the credits is absolutely helpful, understanding that you have a large dollar amount that would result in adjustments. Are we saying that there is a similar situation in West Roseville and that those dollar amounts are significant enough to cause that?
Yeah, and just for clarification, it's Roseville East that is the area that is being.
I'm just going with your
Yes,
report.
my-
So
my-
I'm not,
As Mayor Howdeshelt
I gotta
pointed
get
out.
the mayor to respond. So
But
is that
yes,
your understanding? Is this the credits is what's driving that in the east? And so
East.
yes.
I don't have an understanding.
you don't.
Right, that's why I asked a lot of questions.
Okay.
But, yeah.
And
So,
That
but
is
what's referred
exactly-
to as west, but is actual east is a credit
Yes.
additionally in that area. So when you look at East Roseville, you look at, actually it's West Roseville. We are speaking of West Roseville that is seeing the reduction.
East.
No,
It is
east.
It's actually
East
east.
is
Yeah,
East,
Granite Bay to
Okay.
East
Yeah.
Roseville, and then
Toward the lake-
Roseville on, then
lake
it's,
down
okay,
yeah, Roseville West.
toward the Coast Range up.
all right. We need to adjust your city a little bit to make it easier.
Well,
So relative to that, though, that is a key nexus in relationship to those numbers is those credits.
Yes, the Roseville East has about a $1.5 million credit against a cost share of about 7 million. It's about a 22% reduction based on that credit. And so that is a big chunk of what's occurring there.
Okay, and that's very helpful to understand. And if I missed that in the data here, then my apologies.
It's in the minutia.
It's okay. I apparently didn't get all the way to the minutia. So the next item of interest for me is the tiers. Personally, from a Rockland perspective, when we looked at tiers and how we approach it, and we as well, just like the fees for SPRTA, we were a little slow in reacting and adjusting. We went a little higher on the tiers. So looking at the recommendations, you have the 3 versus the 4. I will say, based on the information presented, what I'm seeing, the calculations, I lean more towards a higher number of tiers. But can you explain to me the recommendation from the TAC to help me really understand why? Why is the TAC sticking with, because 4 would seem, in fact, you could even do more, but 4 would seem to be better aligned. And I will tell you, from the way the state is approaching it and the way that we've approached it from a city perspective, that increase in tiers seems to be more applicable and appropriate.
The recommendation of 3 really it comes down to administrative burden and complexity that is with each added tier. There are more programming to be done in the software. When things are updated, there are more work. 4 is more work than 3, essentially. And so the argument was they wanted to limit that amount of administrative work. And fundamentally 3 is less than 4, so it's less work. I got counter staff and
That works in my math too.
Yeah.
I didn't get the new math. So again, though, it's not necessarily we question the 4, it's more of creates a little more work, but if from at least one chair, there's a belief that the 4 represents a more appropriate application. It's not a matter of it's not appropriate. It's a matter of it's got to create a little work. We got to adjust things, do some reprogramming, but it can be done.
it can be done. We did look at it financially, and from a financial standpoint, there's like a 1% difference in revenue generation between the 3 and the 4. So it's not anything significant. It's simply the desire of the staff to, reduce the administrative burden.
Okay, but based on our plans and the expected development that's occurring across our region, the South Placer region, this would fit in our friends in the BIA definitely feel from the development community perspective that this is better aligned relative to the
Yeah,
application.
they have a very strong preference for a 4th tier.
Great. All right, those are all the questions I have. Anything else from the board?
Interested to hear from Diane.
Well, I do have a question then. We just approved a fee deferral extension on the board yesterday, and what SPRTA is asking for is an administrative fee to cover the extra administrative costs, the extra manpower to process that. So if you did something like that with more tiers, if the greater cost, is there a possibility of just adding an administrative fee to account for that extra manpower?
The SPRTA fee program itself does include a small amount for an administration fee. I guess we could take another look at that. I don't know big picture if that's, I'll be honest, I don't know that it's sort of worth that difference. But certainly something we could look at.
Okay.
Yeah, and it just kind of a thought on my part, because we love using acronyms in PCTPA, it's a CODB. That is a cost of doing business. So for me, I don't know that I would be in favor of throwing more adjustments in there, but I appreciate that
Yeah.
comment. So, okay, with that, I believe we can open it up. Do we want to open it up for public comment first, or do we have any additional presentation from Dawn relative to the study? So we'll open it up for public comment. All right. So with that, we will open it up to public comment. Is there anyone in chambers who wishes to comment on this item?
Thank you, Chair Broadway and members of the SPRTA board. Jeff Short with the North State Building Industry Association. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I did provide a letter. I won't repeat it. My comments will largely reflect that, though. I do want to start by saying that we appreciate the tremendous amount of work that SPRTA staff has put into this effort, including their work with us. The fees before you are still very high and are going to be difficult for new homeowners to bear. I don't think there's any question about that. However, through that work of the SPRTA staff, they are certainly much more palatable than they otherwise could have been. And we do appreciate that. As has been mentioned several times, we do have a strong preference for the 4-tier fee program. We recognize the additional administrative burden that this would place on staff. However, much like our concern with the fee itself, the more we can do to help generate more attainable housing, attainable by design housing, reducing the fee on the type of housing that is least able to recoup the costs of government imposed fees in the marketplace, the more likely that is from a private builder perspective to be able to come forward in your jurisdictions. As noted, your housing elements all call for that kind of more of that kind of housing, and certainly we believe that the more tiers provided, the more easily we could provide that housing. We came in asking for many tiers. We look at 4 as being a compromise, again, understanding that administrative burden. So would strongly urge that you go for the 4-fee tier, as presented in your staff report. Also want to say that we believe that these fees are going toward projects that are going to be dependent on other sources of revenue, including a potential transportation funding measure. It would be our preference that any adjustment made in the fees come forward at the same time that we know whether or not that additional source of revenue is going to materialize. And we think that that's a way to indicate that the new homeowners that are going to be paying for these facilities through these fees are actually getting the services that they're expecting to pay for. And finally, I do want to point out that the BIA is at this point not advocating for the creation of a fee deferral program for the tier 1 fee. So I want to thank you again for your partnership. Look forward to working together with you as we continue to build a region that we can all be happy with. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask either staff or Mr. Short a question?
Certainly.
So, the home building industry changes with market preference. You know, there was a while in which, sorry for the derogatory term, McMansions were, sought out as the American dream. Do we have data that shows, to me, it would be compelling to me on the 3-tier versus 4-tier to know how many potential units are out there that are above, what is that? 3,500 and above, whatever, 3,300 and above. Do we have any numbers?
If I could, I'd actually like to start with Jeff. I mean, he knows his business. So
Yeah.
Jeff, can you take a shot at that?
Yeah, I potential units is tough because, as you say, the markets change. I think that there is, and as commercial development continues to flourish in South Placer, will continue to always be a demand for those large MIC or otherwise mansions. So I wouldn't be concerned about kind of those extreme high value residencies. I will say, Mayor Howdeshelt, that your staff actually provided me with an incredible summary of 5-year look back at the square footage that has been built throughout the SPRTA territories. And part of the reason that we have kind of come to an agreement, a compromise on 4, is that we were surprised at where the square footage of what's been built in the current market, or maybe the last market and current market, have ended up. And in fact, that even some of the multifamily units, for example, are being built larger than I would have guessed going into this. So while we still feel very strongly that we do need at least 4, and frankly still feel that and hope in the future that we could divide it up further, and frankly still believe that 33 is probably a little small to end that second to last tier on. I think I would have preferred that to go a little bit higher, closer to 35. You do see what I wouldn't call McMansions, but more larger, but still very kind of what you see in a typical suburban community homes built at kind of the 3,400 square foot range.
Are they multi-generational?
Often they're marketed to that type of buyer who is going to have, the I'll say principal buyer. They have a young family, but they also have their parents living with them. Absolutely.
So, yeah, no, I think the other thing is, thanks for that.
So would it be useful to look at the RENA numbers and the call outs of affordability and try to use that as a measure of what potentially could be coming forward?
So one of the reasons that we are advocating for the reason we like I think it's AB, I can't remember if it's AB or SB, but the X602 implementation of fees, as I keep saying, is it does kind of allow for that lower income, talking about RENA, I'll use that word, type of housing to be built more easily by my members. So using that as a look forward, I mean, absolutely, that is one tool that we could use to kind of gauge what at least your member agencies are hoping to bring forward.
It doesn't mean the market's going to want to buy that
It
product.
doesn't mean the market's going to want to buy it. I will say that, going into this, and there are reasons maybe to limit this to transportation fees. Going into this, my hope was that because you're a regional body covering most of the high growth area in Placer County, that the fee tier system that we came up with could be used as a guide for all development impact fees moving forward, or at least 602 governed development impact fees. So that when, we are looking to build for that type of product, members can easily calculate and get, if you're compounding transportation projects on top of, their park impact fees and other public facility element type fees, that they can see a largely reduced fee burden and be able to bring that forward without impacting kind of the more market-based projects. Because again, we know that those higher dollar value homes are much more easily to recoup that level of fee in the private marketplace.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No,
I have impulse control. So you're not pursuing the fee deferral.
We are not currently advocating for a new fee deferral program for tier 1.
Are you asking for a delay in the collection of the fee, or tying the collection of the fee to the successful passage?
I would characterize it the second way, that I'll hesitate to use the word, I'll say we're comfortable with the fee proposal where they are, certainly not thrilled, but we're comfortable with where they are. We would prefer that they be tied to the successful implementation of that other funding mechanism as well.
So you're very artful in your characterization of this being on the homeowners. There's a equally passionate argument out there that I could see, and I'd love your reaction to it, where the Taxpayers League or other folks say, yeah, developers aren't paying their fair share. Vote no on this measure. What do you say to that?
I mean, if you were to delay it until then, I would say that a case could be made that you've already created the circumstances to increase the amount that developers would pay if the transportation measure passes. I think that in the past, and the argument has been used that the maximum amount is being charged, and that would still be true as well.
Would the BIA be willing to put into interest-bearing account the difference between now and then of the number of units and the amount that would be collected between now and then?
I think that there is certainly an appetite for a discussion about how to true up whatever might ultimately be lost. I don't know candidly exactly what that number is, but I'm not going to. I'm not able right now to commit to any sort of specific program, but we would certainly be open to a discussion.
And I'm going to spring a question on staff.
Sure.
So what is the opportunity lost cost here? Is it 1,000 units that we're not going to capture $50,000 on, or $300,000 on? What's the
Yeah, I don't know. I can ask Rick if he wants to take a shot, but I don't know what is in the pipeline for development within the regions, right? Between now and November of 24.
And I'm gonna kind of look over at Dawn. The number in my head is that we're doing about 3,000 DUEs a year, but I'm not certain. I don't know if I don't know that that's a good number.
Right, don't pin me down, but it's something like that. But the other issue is it's mainly the cost of the 80 interchange.
Right.
And I think you touched on a good point earlier. The issue is that because SPRTA was only assigned 5 million, which was a policy decision based on the thought that there might be money coming from some other source, they are really underpaying their share of that interchange. And so the question that you had raised earlier, development taking place now or has taken place in the recent past, underpaid, and it increases the burden on later generations. That would prolong that problem and aggravate it. And there is no guarantee that the sales tax measure would pass.
This may not be accurate, but I don't think you could install a traffic signal for $5 million, could you?
I mean, probably not 4 of them.
That's a pretty good deal. I'd like to take credit for having I wasn't at the BIA then, so I would like,
But
yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Is there anyone else in chambers from the public that wishes to comment on this item?
If I
We-
could through the chair, I'm sorry.
Yes.
It's not for your action today. Really, what we're looking for is approval of the general staff recommendations around Nexus, and then, of course, denying the proposal for the fee deferral. And this is meant to give us more clarity as we work towards the public hearing in October. And of course, we'll also do these additional meetings. But I do want to, since it was brought forward, go on record that from a staff SPRTA recommendation, we would strongly object to tying any SPRTA fee and its deferral to the passage of a funding measure in November of 24. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One, that action will be taken by PCTPA, which is a larger board. And they may, for their own reasons, decide not to even approach if you heard earlier this morning, in October, you're going to get polling results. You'll get them again in next spring. And in June of 24, we'll come before you and make a recommendation as to whether or not we should even go for a funding measure. So if you were to, as SPRTA, entertain this idea that you'd want to attach the potential increase in fees to a successful outcome of a funding measure, you're really, as SPRTA, sort of influencing future policy discussion at PCTPA. So there's a general policy issue with regards to that. You may, as PCTPA, the larger PCTPA, choose not to move forward. That's one. And then two, which is the larger issue for me, is that these are two different sources of revenue that do two different things. And so essentially what you have in this regional transportation and air quality mitigation fee is a recognition that you formed all the way back in the early aughts that development needs to pay its fair share and its impact on the transportation system. And so yes, have a capital project list. Some of those projects are SPRTA, some of those are non-SPRTA. And if it's a non-SPRTA project, there is no SPRTA revenue that ever goes to it. But do we have part of that capital list that is blended funds, whether that be from existing state sources, potential grants, a potential future sales tax measure, or SPRTA? Yes, there are. And we will use blended funding to deliver that capital program over time. But to attach the potential increase in fee to the successful outcome of a potential another funding measure gets away from what the SPRTA fee is intended to be in the first place, which is just, development paying their fair share towards their transportation impacts. They will still have impacts based on us sitting here today all the way through November of 24. And those impacts will continue and continue and continue, whether or not the larger PCTPA board ever decides to go forward with a funding measure. So, for those are a couple of reasons why, as staff, we would not recommend attaching any potential, SPRTA fee increase to a potential funding measure. I just want us to be on the record with that.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. All right. Once again, is there anyone from the public and chambers who wishes to comment on this item? Being none, do we have anyone online? We do not. All right. I will bring it back to the
motion.
Well, before we do so, Mayor, if we could, is there any further discussion from the board? All right, so before we do, I do. It's my turn to talk, Bruce.
right.
So just relative,
25 minutes.
I promise not to take that. I don't want to have to run to my car right after this to avoid anyone tracking me down. So I won't take that much time, but just to comment on where we are relative to this, just to give a sense, and I know you're ready to make the motion. I will say that the change in the assumptions from the cost perspective, looking at that requirement for the HOV lane and moving that out, looking at the potential grants and different sources of funds. I absolutely agree with that. And I think that was a sound decision to move that forward. And so as it relates to it, I do lean towards the additional residential tiers. I think a 4-tier is much more appropriate. So certainly that is the direction I'm leaning. I would recommend staff move that direction. I would ask that there be additional discussions with Lincoln relative to the calculation and a greater understanding so we can come together as we look at these fees Rockland, I will say, I've met with our member of the TAC. We've worked through it, comfortable, and ready to review that with my fellow council members to support ours. And it is a fairly sizable as well, but I do understand the basis for that. And then on the fee deferral, Mr. Short certainly made that very easy to deny, given there's not really a push for that. And I think that's appropriate. I always struggle with any type of deferral programs. So that is where I stand. I want to thank the BIA and the builders for their continuous engagement and working with staff. I would certainly thank staff for their work done, for all the hard work on putting this together. I know it's never easy. I will say that as it relates to these efforts, it's always a challenge. And just listening to the board comment on how things are calculated, so much change occurs over time. And what we had planned 5 years ago and what we are looking at now, there's discussions about the affordable housing, what the arena numbers look like. Are you getting a higher density versus a single family, with the high density residential versus single family? It's a constantly changing, it's like that ball on your computer screen that keeps moving every time you move your cursor around. We're dealing with that. We have to use the best data we have available, and I think that's been done here. But I do ask that we spend the time necessary to ensure that Lincoln is 100% comfortable with how we've calculated this. As it relates to implementation, I know we're not going to go there, but from my chair, and you're going to see that whether I'm sitting here or I'm sitting at the dais in Rockland, is I've seen too many cases where things have been delayed. So my approach is do it right, and do it right now. So I think we have to move forward. We have to get there. And I know there's concern about, where are we at relative to a tax measure? This has been deferred for 11 years now. 2012, I think, was the last. Was that? 14. Okay, so 9 years. I'm wrong on that. So it's 2014. So I knew it was in that time frame. We've delayed too long, and I think we need to move forward. And then as we move forward, we have these discussions. If additional changes occur, we make the necessary adjustments. So again, I want to just thank everyone, my fellow board members. Thank you for letting me jump on my soapbox for a minute and discuss where I am. And I will look to the board for. I'm sorry, additional comments. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I wanted to make an additional comment too, because in thinking about the tiers, I'm in favor of doing the 4 tiers, but on the third, doing a 2,501 square feet to 3,500. I think the others seem to be at around 1,500 to 1,000 square feet, and I think we should just round that up to 3,500, and then anything greater than 3,500 is the 4th tier. Would be my recommendation. Thank you.
And I can live with that. Question. So pays for the cost of calculating 7 years. How's that? They're paid for through the fee.
Yes. Within the fee, there's an administrative component, and that administrative component pays for an update to the Nexus study. Those fees are paid at the counter. It's a
Sorry, I'll be more specific.
okay.
So does each jurisdiction
Yes.
have the capacity to generate their fee calculations, or is that centralized?
Yeah, each jurisdiction administers the fees, so they've got each jurisdiction sort of puts
software.
each separately, correct. We have a fee table, and we basically give them what's essentially a PDF, and they have to
As
process
Sparta,
everything.
we give them a fee table, and Roseville might do it their way, and Lincoln might do it their way. But at the end of the day, you're because they're going to build that into the other things that they're doing at the counter.
Right.
Yes, sir.
And so with each jurisdiction, there's a level of complexity.
Correct.
So homeowner comes in, builder comes in and says, I'm proposing this square footage house in this area. not only is the tiers of the traffic, but other CDS selling.
Correct.
So
That's
that
correct.
that's my issue with 3 versus 4 versus 12 or whatever, is you create a increasing complexity if you have multiple fees, whether it's the county or the city, that you then have to generate them. So,
Yes, that's correct.
Chair,
All right.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, what I would ask is we refer in that motion to the correction to the Roseville east-west reference.
Yeah. So I would propose that we approve staff's recommendations for the Nexus study, change cost and funding assumptions for the I-80-65 interchange, and deny the proposal for the fee deferral and put off to another day the number of tiers.
Did we also get reference to the residential
Oh, yeah.
tiers, Mr. Mayor?
I'm sorry, Roseville East versus West?
So he said put off till another day.
On the, well, you said
Tiers.
the
tiers.
deferral, you want to put off to another day, or do you want to make a recommendation on the tiers?
No, I want to.
You want to
That's what
just
he wants.
deny
The
it?
deferral is a no. He
Defer
wants
the
to
tiers.
defer the
You
tiers.
want to
another
defer the
day.
tiers to another day?
Yeah.
Will that work for,
So I'll be frank, my hope today was to settle that. So when we brought the Nexus feedback with with that information, we'd have it. But if there's some discussion of 3 versus 4, I think we could bring that back to you with both options and have a decision at the next meeting in regards to that.
Okay, I'll amend my motion then.
So let me ask you a question. Because my sense is you've got 3 for 4 tiers. Would you rather that decision be made today, or would you rather bring it back in October with more information?
To be frank, no.
I would say the more clarity we can get today, the better October and more seamless it will go.
So
We can bring you, as Rick's already stated, we can bring you a fee table based on 3 tiers and a fee table based on 4 if you'd like, or, we can do whatever the board would like us to do.
So I'll amend my motion to approve all staff's recommendations, which includes 3 residential tiers.
do we have a second?
No.
Okay, we do not have a second. Therefore, the motion does not move. Can I get another motion? Suzanne, would you
Yeah, I'll
like to
make
make
the
the
motion.
motion?
I'll make the motion to approve staff recommendations, but also to implement the 4 tiers and the change to the 3,500 square feet on tier 4, the difference between 3 and 4.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. And that is also in reference to the correction to the,
And also to include the
East-west,
correction
yeah.
of
as well.
East
Okay,
Roseville.
thank you. Motion and second, any further discussion? There being none, could we just get a roll call, please?
Broadway,
Yes.
Howdischelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Very cautious, yes.
Jones.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. All right, the next item on our agenda is item H, that is the executive director's report.
Yeah, if you could, I just have a 42 slide PowerPoint that will, I will yield my balance of time back to the chair.
Thank you, Matt. Next item is board direction to staff outside of those prior comments and discussions. Do we have any other board direction for staff? Nope, there being none. Next item is item J, informational items. We have the September 12th TAC minutes that were included in our packet. If there is no other items, our next regularly scheduled SPRTA board meeting will be on October 18th, which was also adjusted along with our BCTPA meeting.
Mhm.
Do you have any-
If I could, through the chair, and just to make sure that BIA has the ability to attend the hearing on the 18th of October due to a conflict, we'll make sure that the SPRTA meeting doesn't start before 10:45. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.